I am here with my friend Bekah Legg. Hello, Bekah.
Hello, you. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad apart from the cold that won't go away, but hey, we carry on. I know you in different capacities. I want to talk to you about Restored and all the stuff that's going on with that. But if no one's heard of Restored before, we'll get into it properly later. But what is Restored in a nutshell?
So, in a nutshell, we have a mission to speak up about violence against women and girls, to equip the church to stand against domestic abuse in particular, and to support survivors. That's it in a sentence.
Fine. That is definitely a nutshell, and it's much more than that, even the little bit that I do know. Now, I've got to go here. Steve Legg was my friend, your husband. I know people want to know, and I have to ask this question, but how are you finding life adjusting to try and find some semblance of normal?
It's a strange world, and nobody, there are books on grief, and actually, there's been one in particular that I found incredibly helpful, but nobody tells you how you're going to feel, and nobody tells you what your path is going to be like. And so it's a strange world, but there's also hope and there's joy. There's tears. I had a massive meltdown yesterday trying to deal with mobile phone company. The poor man on the other end of the phone, who frankly had not been very terribly helpful, but he got the full force of a Becca sobbing meltdown of I can't do this. So that I still have those moments, and I'm sure I will for a long time. But I'm okay. I'm okay. And actually, it's 4 months and I don't know, 4 months and a few days since Steve left us, and I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. Yeah.
I know if I don't ask, people will.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a slightly easier way of doing that. I really wanted to get into Restored. Now, we spoke last year at the gathering about Restored. I know a tiny piece about it, but let's just start with here. What's the history of where Restored came from to where it is at the moment?
Oh, good question. And it's, yeah, like the proper origin story. I've been
Yeah.
talking about this a lot recently, actually,
Yeah.
because I realize I don't tell our origin story enough. And so essentially, I've been at Restored for nearly 5 years now, but Restored has been around for nearly 15. And it was created by two people, Peter Grant and Mandy Marshall, who at the time both worked for Tear Fund. And Peter was their international director, and Mandy was their gender justice specialist. And they were both at a UN World AIDS Conference in Mexico City in 2008. And now this was, violence against women was something that Mandy was already very passionate about ending, just to be clear, not about continuing it. But Peter had a much broader purview. Anyway, they were sitting at this conference, and there was one story in particular which really struck home. And it was a woman from Namibia whose story was one of having been raped multiple times by multiple people. And that was why she was, HIV positive. That was why she was in the position she was in. And I think it really rammed home, perhaps to Peter in particular, because Mandy already understood that actually violence against women just happens across the globe.
Hmm.
And it's just one of those things. It's something that doesn't get talked about. It's something that nobody's doing anything about. And Peter always talks, he always explains that conference hall as being the place where he experienced the Holy Spirit in a way he'd never experienced him before. And he said, I just felt like God gave me two questions. Where is the church and where are the men? What are they doing to stop this? And so they came home and they went back to Tear Fund and said, we'd love to do more about, equipping the church to end violence against women and girls. And at the time, Tear Fund said, we're not sure this is an us thing, but we think it's a wonderful thing and we will support you setting something else up. So they kind of released Mandy and Peter to do that. Nowadays, actually, Tear Fund does do quite a lot in this area internationally, but at the time they didn't. And so Restored was formed in 2010, and at the beginning, it worked very much globally, working a bit like Tear Fund does with partner churches or partner organisations around the world, resourcing them to be able to answer this question: how can we create a world where women don't need to live in fear of violence? That's our big vision. How do you create that world? But over the years, they came to this recognition that the form of violence that most women are most likely to experience is at the hands of somebody who's meant to love them. It's domestic violence. And then this kind of secondary gut-wrenching discovery that that domestic abuse is as prevalent in the church as it is outside, and yet we don't talk about it people take longer to come forward and ask for help within the church than they do if they're outside. And that is a terrible thing. And that faith is intertwined with it, because the teachings that we have, which are beautiful and good and true, can sometimes be taken and twisted and weaponized to hold women with abusers, or to make them at the best feel like they're stuck and they have no choice. And so actually being able to help people unpick who God thinks they are and what God wants for their life, it's a really important part of somebody finding freedom and finding safety. And you can't separate faith from experience. Those things belong together. And so that's part of our origin story of who we are, which perhaps I'll stop there and see if you've got more questions. Otherwise, I can just keep talking forever.
No, it's fine. I was thinking that there are quite a few topics in the church, aren't we? Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. And then it'll just go away. But it doesn't. We're seeing it with politics at the moment, and there's such polarization of stuff that we are talking about that probably actually we don't need to talk about, because there's much more important stuff.
Yeah.
But the stuff that is, I'm going to say carefully, less important becomes the only thing. Actually, do you know what? That's not the only thing. There's more to life than that, which then pushes all the other stuff that we really should be talking about. Kind of, I don't know if it's suppressed, probably is sometimes, but I think sometimes it just gets lost in the noise. And I think that bit of a hush and a pause, we'd see, do you know what? There's real problems that need to be solved. And this stuff maybe isn't it. And actually stuff like you're trying to talk about, actually we might have more capacity to talk about that and deal with that. We weren't wasting our energies in every which way, possibly having worked in churches, so we don't have to deal with it because we don't know how. So, you know, it's a bit of a messy response to what you just said, but I think having worked in churches as well, we let's just do this and we'll just forget about that, and maybe it'll fix itself. And yes, sometimes that's okay, but not with this sort of stuff.
No, and I think there are churches who just don't want it to be true either. Because actually it means that their church isn't quite what they thought it was, and their people, it doesn't project the image we want to project. We want to project ourselves as being sorted together, holy, you know, a shining light in the darkness. We've got everything together, and this is what everyone else should aspire to. But the truth is that most of us are a mess. Most of us has got stuff going on that we actually, frankly, would rather nobody else knew about. But actually, church should be a space where we're able to come as we are, and we're able to be honest about the things that we need to, you know, refine and get rid of and change, so that we can become more like Jesus. Because the truth is, none of us are like Jesus just yet. We're all on a journey, and I think, you know, creating churches where you have to pretend you're like Jesus rather than accept that you're on a long road to becoming like Jesus, and it's only with his help and the support of our church communities that we're ever going to get there. Yeah, you know, we don't. But no, I think churches don't want it to be true, and they're scared of opening Pandora's box and the mess that will fall out.
Churches are made of people. The world is made of people. And I know sometimes we look at the police force, for example, we think, oh, it's terrible. There was a police officer and they're being prosecuted for murder or for doing some other crime. And it's like, well, they are people. You know, this isn't justifying what they're doing. It's just saying, well, they're part of our civilization and our society. So if we're having a problem, why would they not have the similar problems? Because they're going to have the same crimes that we do. Yes, we'd like them not to, because they're the police, right? They're supposed to be, you know, bastions of good and justice, but they're also people and they're fallible. Yeah. And I think it's a similar thing with church. I had this thought yesterday, which I shared with somebody, which I'll put to you and see what you think. We were talking about particularly people with sensory health issues. And I said, I think one of the problems in the church is we're so busy trying to include people, we actually need probably to stop excluding people. Might be a better approach, because there's a lot of energy spent including everybody. And we were talking about how, you know, the resources for a church to help someone who's got, I don't know, sensory issues with too much noise makes them unable to cope. So we were looking at it very specifically, but it made me think there's a lot of energy on including people. Perhaps the church might be better suited not excluding people. For example, not saying, well, the Bible says you need to do this, therefore just keep going. I think we've seen it with depression as well. I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to suffer from depression. Well, you're a human being, and human beings suffer depression. Yes, you are a follower of Christ, you have God in you, but that doesn't mean that you are able to avoid the problems of this world. So I'm just curious what your thought about how we can make churches better places, safe spaces, I guess more so from your perspective, but how do we do better as a church community in that context, a sort of inclusion exclusion thing, which is what we were talking about yesterday, specifically in regards to sensory health, but it's that same sort of idea in my head.
I think it's telling I think it's telling the truth, and I think it's being prepared to be vulnerable and honest. And a number of years ago, well, before this job, actually, I worked in the church and I worked on a church leadership team. And one Sunday in particular, we were talking. We'd been working through the book of Corinthians, and we got to the chapter that talks about divorce. And I was married before Steve. Steve and I both were divorcees who got remarried and created a blended family. And so within this service, my colleague had said, why don't we do this a bit differently, Beck? Why don't we do it? Well, can I do an interview with you and we'll talk about your story and some of how you've ended up where you are. And I talked about my first marriage, which actually was abusive, and well, the marriage isn't abusive, somebody abuses. But we told some of that story, and we didn't go into masses of detail, but we did. But we were honest. We were honest about Bekah and Steve are divorcees. This is some of Bekah's story, and that at the end of that day, we just said something about, if you want to chat, drop us an email. And within 24 hours, I had 5 emails from 5 women saying that they wanted to talk to me about their marriages.
Wow.
And it transpired that all of them were in very, very, very difficult situations. Some of them really did need to get to safety. And 2 of them, I might have guessed. The other 3, I wouldn't have had a clue. But by being prepared to tell my story and saying this isn't taboo, this is a place where actually we can be honest about struggles and difficulties and things that we feel like we should carry shame about, but actually we don't need to. You make it possible for other people to do the same thing. And I think that's some of it, acknowledging, and it can be as simple as acknowledging that it was a nightmare to get out the door this morning, get to church on time because the kids and everyone fought in the car on the way, and everyone goes, oh, you're not a perfect family. Phew. That means I can bring my kids. Even I had a wonderful story a couple of weeks ago. I was at an event and there's somebody I know came, and we were talking about kids and older teenagers, and her teenage son had been out and he'd had too much to drink the night before. She said, and I made him come. He'd come home really late, and I'd said to him in the morning, you're getting out of bed and you are coming to church with me. And he's like, what? I don't want to. She said, I took him, and everyone said, oh, he doesn't look very well. She went, no, it's not that, he's drunk. He stinks, and I wouldn't get any closer. And I thought, do you know what? I love that you didn't try and hide him away. I love that you didn't try to pretend that wasn't happening. Now, it's one of those situations that none of us want. Like, we all go, well, I hope that's never my children. But the truth is, it probably will be. And actually, if you're in a space where you can go, here's the thing. Here's the thing. We're not perfect, but we're here. And we're pushing after Jesus, then I think that's a really good thing. Sorry, it was quite a long answer.
No, it's perfect, because I think that being vulnerable is so important. Years ago, our 3rd child, we lost through miscarriage. I shared about that. I actually built a little website. I got involved with a charity for a while on their Facebook, just as not even a volunteer, just talking to other dads who didn't know how to process that. And I found in my being vulnerable about what I struggled with, which was basically, I have no clue what I'm feeling. I don't feel anything at the moment, and I don't know how to process feeling nothing. That conversation I had many, many times with other dads specifically who said, oh, that's what I feel, and I couldn't put it into words. Because how do you verbalize nothing? But that's what it felt like. And all of a sudden, these little conversations of, well, how long should I take to process this? And I would say simply one thing every single time: there is no time length. It took me years actually to get over that. Some people might be shorter, but I said there is no time length. There is just you processing emotion. But that, like you said, that being vulnerable is so important, because all of a sudden people are saying, they're having that same struggle. Oh, that's okay. So I'm allowed here then. I'm allowed into this space because I'm having that same battle. But like you say, it's that being vulnerable, not being vulnerable in a wise sense.
Yes.
In order.
Choose your moments and make sure that you feel safe about the whole thing.
Yeah.
But what was beautiful about that is that actually it wasn't even the baby loss that was the vulnerability. It was I don't really understand my own emotions was the vulnerability. That was the bit, wasn't it? That was the bit you go, that's what's unlocked the door for somebody and gone, oh, you too. I get that. That. Yeah.
And I think, what place church could be if we were more honest. I read a whole bunch of testimonies, doesn't matter what they were, but everybody seemed to have a similar thing. It takes them several years to come to faith. There's that kind of initial, let's call it the encounter of church, encounter of religion. And from that point to, I am now a follower of Christ, it seems to take an average of 2 to 3 years. Seems to be pretty normal. But if it takes that long to come to having a faith, then you could then extrapolate fairly easily. There's a lifetime of stuff behind that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's not quick.
No. No, it takes time.
So let's just go back a bit in time for you, life and faith, which is what I love to talk about.
Mhm.
How did you first encounter Jesus so he became a part of your life?
As a very young child, actually. So I'm, fortunate to have been brought up in a family where Jesus was just always part of the conversation and he was part of the family. And we spoke to him at bedtime and we spoke to him at dinner time and we spoke to him all the time. And we went to church on Sundays. And my parents lived out a very real faith. And I have a very particular memory of sitting on the living room floor aged about 4 or 5 and asking Jesus to be my friend in the way that I understood as a small child, that I knew I wanted Jesus to be my friend. And it just, I guess my faith grew and developed from there, but not without its moments of, as a teenager, sticking my fingers in my ears and my hands over my eyes going, la, 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 I don't want to listen to you. I think this looks a lot more fun over here. Um, and so I went on I went on a real journey of faith, and I think I got baptized when I was about 12. My parents were really strict, actually. They said, right, if you want to get baptized, that's fine, but this is a public declaration. So how are you going to make it public? How are you going to let people know at school? I ended up putting a poster up at school in my tutor group to let people know I was getting baptized and to invite people. Nobody came, but that's not true. My friends came. But it was, something that my parents were like, don't, this isn't just something you do because you've seen other people do it. This is you letting people
Wow.
know that you follow Jesus. I haven't repeated with my own kids. Post-rap at school, but I did, and I have always loved Jesus, even at the times when I put my fingers in my ears and kind of went my own way for a while. I always knew he was there. I always knew I'd be back, and I think that God's been a really important part of my life. And actually, um, some of the story of me leaving my first husband, God was so at the heart of like wooing me back and loving me back and releasing me from that marriage. That he was so kind to me, and I just think so that's some of my story, really.
But you see, I take all of what you've just said, and it makes sense that how you came to faith, I suppose, your perspective, your stance around faith, with the way that your parents were. This is serious. This matters. And knowing you a little bit as I do, it kind of makes sense to me that I think, well, restored just fits because God's taken all of who you were, the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, and then God does what God does and redeems that in the way that only God
Yeah.
can. And then you're now working for Restored. Where is Restored going? I mean, it's 2025. A lot of people have their year vision thing. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not, just for the sake of doing it. But where's Restored going in 2025?
So we have two key things that we focus on at the moment, one of which is equipping the church. So we are running training, but that is growing apace. So we have 3 different particular levels of training that we offer churches or individuals. And our level 1 training we've now developed it in a way that's a bit plug and play, some videos and resources that go with that. So it doesn't need us to come and facilitate it. And we're really excited at the end of last year to partner with the Church of England, who've taken that training now and made it their mandatory training for clergy and certain members of the laity as well. So for us, that's amazing, because where we might have trained a few hundred people a year, that will be thousands, which is outstanding, of just recognizing that this is something now that people will be a lot more aware of and are more equipped. So we're looking to grow that as well and start working with more organizations, more church networks, to enable them just to, in this very simple fashion, go, look, this will help your churches become safer places. So that's exciting. Always growing. We have something we call the Restored Beacon Network, which is churches who choose to really purposefully partner with us to be hubs in their local community, really supporting survivors and challenging and changing culture, really extending the kingdom of God into their local communities and showing a different way of men and women relating together. So that's always a priority as well. So that's our kind of equipping the church, training resources, these churches growing. And we have a survivors network, which is an online community for Christian women. And we've got, I think at the last time I looked at the numbers, it was 728, but that was a couple of weeks ago, so it will have gone up since then. So 728 active members at the moment, who are mostly, well, they're all women, they're mostly Christian, they're mostly from the UK, and they're all women who have been subjected to domestic abuse and who are at varying stages of that journey of rediscovering who they are,
Hmm.
having been told that there's somebody very different. And we run recovery courses. We're hosting a retreat this year, which we're very excited about. We had a 24-hour retreat last year, and this year we've gone for a whole weekend. And so we're excited about that, to just have this like safe space where women can come and just be with other women who get it. We're not going to run recovery courses. We're not going to run, therapy sessions. We're going to be together and spend time with Jesus and each other, have fun, but that be in a really safe environment. So that's an exciting thing. And those are probably the things that we're really digging into as we move forward, because we're not an enormous organization. We have to be really careful about capacity. But the one thing that I think God is really nudging us towards this year is something around that question that Peter felt God asking him back in 2008, where are the men? Because historically Restored had a men's engagement kind of arm, and that had fizzled out by the time that I started, and with limited resources we decided to focus on some key things. But I really feel like God's prompting us to go back, revisit that. What does that mean? What does it look like? And some of that came from actually being at the gathering last year, and I led a seminar with my friend Tan, and we talked about what women want men to know. And actually some of the feedback from that was so wonderful. I work in a sector where I hear a lot of horrible stories about men, and I know that not all men are bad. I know that. But that day I was in a room with 1,000 men going, oh, there's loads of you who are brilliant. Rah. And I wish I'd been able to bring a lot more women with me that I work with. And but I thought, how wonderful to hear these men saying, but what could I do? I work in a construction industry. Perhaps we could clean up the construction industry. I'm like, yes, that would be good. Or I work in schools. How can I be talking to boys? Or I've got sons. And I just thought, oh no, I think that's interesting. And then a few other stories along the way have really prompted me to pull together some key men and have this conversation about what could it look like? What does it require? What does it need? We haven't got any more money as an organisation, and we haven't got a man working for us at the moment. So how do we make this work? So I think that's going to be, I'm really sure that that's a conversation we have to be having this year. So that's something we're beginning to dig into and draw forward, and we'll see where we end up.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
But it's good.
Yeah.
We do things we can we can try. What's that thing of silos, which I've heard in offices ever so often. We work in silos and it's not very good because we don't talk to each other. But the best way of dealing with any situation is together in some sort of partnership, some sort of, working together thing. And if I look at a group of offices that are very male dominated or very female dominated, there are some massive generalizations of how that might play out with working together, which is why it's good to have balance in those places. I know in the probation service they struggle because there's so many women and so few men. It's really hard sometimes to work and to have good examples. This, I know it's something that probation service will struggle with. It's like we want some really good men to meet the men we're working with, but
exactly.
Yes, a woman can do that, but it'd be great to have some men as well.
You do need men to talk to, like you just do. The day that we don't need men to talk to men about this, we don't need to do the job anymore. So it's it's a vicious circle really. But we do need some men to get involved and to be part of this.
No, I totally agree. Yes, very much. So Restore's doing loads of stuff. Let's just go back to the idea of the church that's thinking, I don't want to talk about it. No, this isn't happening. Mm-hmm. This is a nice person. They can't possibly do that. I remember hearing a police officer say, why are people so shocked when they meet the mass murderer down the street? Well, they were a nice, normal guy. Well, yes, they were, because if they wouldn't have behaved in that way,
you'd have caught them ages ago. Yeah,
exactly. How do people get access to children? Because then they project a nice image. Otherwise they wouldn't, because kids aren't stupid. So they fake and they lie. So how do we help people who don't want to engage with even the concept that something evil is going on in their church? How do we help them to, because you're not just dealing with, let's help them fix it. The first step is, this is actually happening, and undoing what they know can't be before you can say, well, now that we know this is going on, let's do this. But how do you help people who are at this can't be happening in my church bit?
Well, I think there are two things that you can do, and one is we've done some really, proper research with proper universities and everything, that have shown actually it's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 outside of the church, 1 in 4 women inside the church have been subjected to domestic abuse. That's some really cold, hard facts. And that means that when you look around your church, quarter of the people sitting on the pew, in fact, it was a quarter of churchgoers, not even women, a quarter of the people sitting there have been affected by this. That's in some shape or form. So that really is just true. But I think actually it's personal story sometimes as well, isn't it? It's that, being able to play somebody the story, because the truth is that, we don't want to, when something bad happens to somebody else, if it's not personal, if they had a car crash, if they fell off the curb and broke their leg, like we find it really easy to empathize with that, because it's straightforward. Like, you broke your leg, that's terrible. Gosh, you can't work, that's terrible. Yeah, but the minute it involves interpersonal stuff and we're being asked to choose between two people that we know, we hate that, because we don't want that to be true, because now it's not straight. This isn't straightforward anymore. You're telling me that you're hurting because somebody else that I know and I thought I liked, because and it's exactly that thing of going, but I thought I knew them. That can't possibly be true. And we don't like it for lots of reasons, partly because it makes life awkward. It's just straightforward. It makes, man, now I've got to make a decision. I've got to decide whether or not to believe you. I've got to decide what to do with this other person who isn't what I thought they were. But it also upsets us because it means that our judgment was out and we didn't see it. And that frightens us, because that makes our world a little bit less safe. Because well, if they're not who I thought they were, who else isn't who I thought they were? Golly, I thought I was quite a good judge of character. I thought my radar was quite good, and it isn't. So now I don't like this. Now my world's become a much more scary place. So I'm going to bury my head in the sand. I'm not going to believe you. And we're just going to pretend it's not true. And that's a lot easier. And it's why we see victim blaming. When you hear stories of women getting attacked at night, go, well, if they hadn't have been out so late, and if they hadn't have worn that skirt, and if they hadn't have had that to drink, and you think, well, that just makes you feel safer, because in a world where bad things only happen to people who have somehow deserved it, then you're safe, and your kids will be safe, and your wife will be safe, and because so long as they don't wear the skirt, so long as they don't go out at night, so long as they don't do those things, their world's safe. You think, well, that sadly isn't true. But we want to create a world that's safe for us to live in, so we don't want to believe it.
Yeah, I think that probably sums up quite a lot of it. I know in churches, especially when you start to bring faith in, like you say, it starts to get very intermingled and it's mashed in. And if we start to get a little bit of confusion creeping in about what might be and what does that scripture really mean, and especially around divorce and stuff, we can start that becomes the baseball bat of forcing someone to behave a certain way. But let's assume that now we've got somebody who's moved past it can't be, it's life. How then does that church get help to work with people in their congregation? So they've moved past the it can't be, now they know it is. How else can you help people from that point?
Well, I think the most important thing you can do is get educated. Like, you go and find out. Now there's a problem. Go and work out what that looks like, because we can do damage. I don't like to pretend I'm a doctor and know how to fix somebody. Go, oh, yeah, have these tablets, they look shiny. Like, you don't do that. You need to go and find out what you don't know. You can get connected with your local services in your local area and actually say, what can we do to help you? Maybe it's raising money. Maybe it's collecting toys for kids in the refuge. I don't know. It could be anything. But actually getting educated really matters. And at Restored, we've got a downloadable resource. We've got a church hand guide to understanding stuff. And we run training online every term. So you can just do that. And that is a very, very good start, because then there are some little things you can do. You don't have to do the full step of becoming a whole-blown beacon if you're not ready. But it might be as simple as putting some posters on the back of the toilet doors that just signpost people to your local services and say, if you're in a relationship where you don't feel safe, here's our local services number. Well, that does two things. It helps people find their local services, but it also helps them know that this is a church that isn't afraid to have these conversations. And that is really key. And it might be that as a church, then you could, I don't know, when you pray, be able to at some point pray for perhaps a story in the news, or pray for your local refuge. Like, there are ways of bringing the conversation in that don't have to be, a massive campaign or a massive thing, but that just begin to acknowledge and say, this is a church where this is not a taboo subject. So and it's amazing how massive an impact that is. I had a survivor in one of our recovery groups, and she wasn't in church at the time. She'd had to leave her church when she left her abuser, and she hadn't been to church for a while. And she came into the group one week absolutely beaming. I said, oh, what's happened? And she said, oh, Becca, I found a church. And I said, oh, have you? How did you, And she said, well, I went on their website and I realized they signposted restored. And she said, and so I thought they'd probably be safe, or at least I could talk to them. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? And I didn't have a clue who this church was at the time. And now they are a restored beacon, but at the time I didn't know who they were. And I thought, but what a difference. And all that was if you're suffering from this, here's who we recommend. But that was enough to signpost, to signal to one woman, I can come here. I can come to your church. I would be able to I'm able to come with my mess. I'm able to come with my story, and I won't be rejected. And she knew that from a line on a website. And it's so simple, isn't it? You just think it can be incredibly easy, but get yourself educated, because that's the first step towards everything.
But I think a really interesting point of that is you just said that it's something really simple. I mean, a bit on a website is almost no effort whatsoever. Yeah. It takes a web designer about 15 seconds, and yet that's opened the door for somebody, shone a light on it. And I think, if a church is thinking we can't possibly enter this realm, how can we help victims? How can we help the whole situation? Then we've got to provide it. It's really simple. There are other services that you can contact.
Yes, exactly.
And I wonder how much of it is people just thinking, we can't deal with this. This is bigger than us. Well, yes, it is, but you don't have to do everything.
Yeah, because actually one of the things we know is when churches try to be the expert and try to handle everything in-house and we don't need anybody else, that usually goes pretty wrong. So it's something going, just know what you can and can't. If somebody came sick, you might pray for them, but you would also say, well, let's get you to the doctor. That's what you would do. You wouldn't try and be the doctor. So it's really important to use the local experts to be the experts. But what church can be is a really good friend. And I think that's one of the things that's really helpful to understand about domestic abuse. There's many, many things to understand about impact of trauma and realities of it and how hard it is to leave and all the rest of it. But it always ends up with somebody feeling very isolated. They've often been systematically isolated from friends and family. And what they need more than anything is somebody to say, you are not on your own anymore. I've got you. I might not know the answers, but I'll be with you. I'll help you find them out. And that's a brilliant thing that you can do. You can provide them with a safe space to look at a computer and look for local services, or to get onto the Restored Survivors Network, or to order a survivor's handbook that we can send. You can do all of those things without needing to be the expert. You just need to be a good friend who walks alongside. I love there's a verse in the Psalms that says that God puts the lonely in families. And I love that. And that's what I think our churches should be. They should be a place where we come and go, oh, you're not on your own anymore. We've got us.
But coming right back to the very beginning of Restored, you've got two people saying, we think this is something we need to do. Tier Funder saying, well, that's not really what we do. And I mean, respect for that. They're not just trying to weaken their own thing and do what they're not skilled, resourced, established to do. But they're also saying, well, we can't do it, but let's help you. And I think that right there is the heart that I think churches need to hear, which is you don't need to fix it all. You just need to realize that you just said, we can't do it all, but we can listen and we can say, bring these guys or get in touch with so-and-so. And that can transform somebody's life for good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. If a church is listening or somebody's listening thinking, oh, this is interesting. How do I get involved with Restored? How do I support? How do I get help for my church group? We want to do something. We don't know where to begin. How do they get hold of you and the lovely team at Restored?
Well, our website is really Googleable. If you put domestic abuse and Christian into Google, you will guaranteed get something come up from us. But we are restored-uk.org. And on there is information about everything. So it should be quite straightforward.
Thank you. Bekah, thank you. It's one of these topics that people get very scared of, but it isn't scary as you think it is from a church's perspective, because there are others who do know, like you and your organisation. So don't fear somebody who's come in who you're thinking, oh, what's going on? Get help. It's not complicated. We do it for everything else. You wouldn't have the fire alarms going off and then thinking I'll fix it with a screwdriver. No, you get an electrician. And if you have this, call in Restored, who can help you and give you some advice on how to be a better church. Bekah, thank you. Restored-uk.org. Thank you, Bekah.
Brilliant. Thank you.